want to get started here. So we've had a chance to talk with Matt a little bit. Matt's been a good friend and personally and with MRES for a number of years now, and helps us with our staying a membership of their organization. He is involved as a East Side writer for in St. Paul there. And he's also operations coordinator for MEP, or Minnesota Environmental Partnership, where he's worked for 5 years. And so he's got, I think, a very interesting story to tell us tonight. So, Matt, would you just take it from here?
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me here, MRES. And for the introduction, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint here. All right. So yeah, as Doug said, my name is Matt Dahl. I work for the Minnesota Environmental Partnership, and I'm here to talk to you about an exciting new development coming to the east side of St. Paul. It's called the Heights. It's hopefully will be a carbon-free community. I'll get into a little bit more about what that means further on. So just a quick introduction about myself. In addition, I've lived in the Twin Cities for about 10 years, and in the greater East Side, which is kind of the northeast corner of St. Paul, for about 5. I'm involved in the Heights project just as a community member. I don't work for the Port Authority or the city of St. Paul at all, so I'm not claiming to be part of the good work they do, but I have served on the sustainability work group for the site that's helped advise it, and been involved in community interactions therein as part of that project. I actually own a house with my wife that's a few blocks from the site, so we're really excited to see what's going to happen. And as Doug said, I'm the operations coordinator for the Minnesota Environmental Partnership. I do a lot of different things for MEP. I joke that it's easier to list the things that I don't play a part in, but that includes communications, fundraising, operations, digital advocacy, and web design, just all sorts of stuff. I don't claim to be an engineer or a scientist, however. I'm just an environmental activist who's really excited to see this project happening in my neighborhood. And I'll just note that you can see my email there, and a link to the MEP blog if you're interested in reading about the things that we're up to. And if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can just pause it. But if anybody needs my email after this, I'm happy to provide that. And then just a few quick things about MEP, the organization I work for. We are the state's largest coalition of environmental organizations, currently about 70 members, including MRES. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we don't campaign in elections or anything like that, but we do advocacy work, things like that. Our philosophy is just generally that the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts. 25 years ago, roughly, a group of organizations came together because they saw there was a need for a community and collaboration within the environmental movement. They found that sometimes their work was duplicative, disorganized, just wasn't working very well on some things. And so they put together this structure to help talk through our differences and work strategically together. And that's what we aim to do. We are focused on a number of issues. Statewide climate action is a huge one for us. That's kind of our marquee issue. We also work on Great Lakes issues up in the North Shore and thereabouts. Clean agriculture is a big focus of ours, supporting things like the Forever Green Initiative. We've also done work on fighting and monitoring the Line 3 pipeline. We convene a number of clusters of issue groups to talk through strategy on issues. And we publish a weekly Environmental Insider newsletter that has a column from me and then a roundup of major stories, blogs, op-eds, and opportunities. So encourage you to check us out. But moving on to the Heights. So before I get into it, I'd like to acknowledge my sources. Again, I'm not the subject matter expert on this, but I do love researching it and sharing about it. So the information and images in this slideshow mostly come from the City of St. Paul Port Authority, Minnesota Compass, which is a great resource for demographics if you're interested in that kind of thing, U.S. Green Building Council, and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, among a few others like Department of Energy. I also got some information from. And I just want to say that I really appreciate the work that City of St. Paul and the Port are doing to put this all together. So before I get into what the Heights is or what it will be, I want to talk a little bit about the Greater East Side, kind of the context of the neighborhood that I live in and that this is going on in. So I call myself an East Side evangelist because I was telling people, get over here. The food's great. We got beer, we got parks, we got all kinds of things. So the Greater East Side itself is a part of the broader St. Paul East Side. It's about 4 square miles, pretty small. You can walk there. You can walk really from any 2 points in the Greater East Side in about an hour. There's about 30,000 of us living there. So that's 1/10 of the population of St. Paul, mostly residential, but we have lots of businesses as well. Plenty of parks and green space. You've got Lake Phelan on one side and you've got Beaver Lake Park on the other. And it's just I find a really comfortable community to live in and hopefully improving soon with this new development. It's also highly diverse. We are more than 60% people of color. It's a major center for the Twin Cities Hmong community, but there are many cultures represented here. Historically has been home to successive waves of immigrants. Working class neighborhood, I would say. We do tend to have kind of lower ends of the income spectrum. It's identified as an environmental justice area by the MPCA, meaning that can mean majority POC, or it can mean 40% of individual incomes are less than 185% of the federal poverty line, which kind of just means that we do tend to have more lower income folks. So we are kind of doubly an environmental justice area in that priority or that parameters. 1 in 8 households has no personal vehicle, which kind of becomes relevant later in this presentation. We are more likely to use Metro Transit to get to work, but less likely to bike, walk, or work from home. I would say part of that is that there are barriers, unsafe roads in some cases, or just not necessarily bike, walk safe. And of course, there's also jobs that just simply can't be done from home. So that's part of it as well. But the commutes do tend to be longer than the state as a whole. I think we have a lot, comparatively speaking, of commutes that are over half an hour, which is part of the reason that this development is so interesting because it combines both jobs and housing. And then a little bit also about Maplewood, which I mentioned because it borders the site of this development to the north and the east across Larpenteur McKnight Avenues. It's one of St. Paul's largest suburbs, 42,000 people, home of 3M. I would say not as diverse as St. Paul or the Greater East Side, but it is diverse still. Many cultures and income levels represented. And North St. Paul is also within a mile from the site. And I just want to check here. My screen share coming through okay?
Yes, looking good.
Great. All right. So moving along. So the Hillcrest Golf Course. When I say Hillcrest, and it's kind of used interchangeably with the Heights because the site that it's on used to be the Hillcrest Golf Course. The development will be called the Heights. So this is a 112-acre golf course. You can see the clubhouse there and then an aerial map. Opened over 100 years ago, so it's older than most of the houses I would say in the area. My house is about 100 years old, so it kind of grew up together. But it's got a long history on the east side. There was a period for some years when it was an exclusively Jewish golf course during kind of a wave of anti-Semitism in the Twin Cities. But so a lot of history. It includes the highest point in the city of St. Paul, up on one of the hills there, and it was recently closed for financial reasons in 2017 by the Pipe Fitters Union, which bought it kind of as an investment property. So that's a little bit of context and history of the golf course itself. That I should also say that it's for those of you who are familiar with the Ford site, also in St. Paul, it's somewhat smaller than that, probably like 10, 15 acres smaller, but still pretty big. And for those of you who might not know, golf courses are not super great for the local soil and water in a lot of cases. In this case, mercury was used as a fungicide and to kind of keep the greens green, which worked pretty well for that, but it also left the site highly contaminated. The clay soils over most of the site are toxic. It's fenced off because it's a health hazard. You can't go onto the site. It's completely fenced. And the only real infrastructure is in the old clubhouse, and then there's a couple of sheds here and there, but there's really hardly any water, water pipes, power, anything like that. Very hilly, wooded landscape. It's kind of gone back to nature somewhat since it was closed down. So in 2019, after looking around for buyers, the pipe fitters sold the property to the St. Paul Port Authority, because the Port Authority has the expertise to manage these kind of contaminated sites. And so the city and the port agreed to do general obligation bonds for the site and managed to purchase it. And I'm really glad they did, because they definitely have the ability to clean this place up and turn it into something good. So I'll talk a little bit more about the port, because they're really kind of leading this whole process along with the city. So the St. Paul Port Authority is a nonprofit organization created by the state legislature, I think in the 70s. So they manage St. Paul's Mississippi River ports, which handle things like, agricultural products, construction materials, but they also do a lot for business center development. They help to turn these kind of brown fields, contaminated sites, and turn them into productive land. They produce a lot of jobs, a lot of tax revenue by doing that. And they're also the primary source for commercial PACE financing in Minnesota. And now that stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And I'll kind of get into that later on. It becomes relevant to the Heights. But basically that means that you finance clean energy investments on private property by getting an assessment that you pay with your property taxes for usually 10 to 20 years. And it's tied into the property. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same owner paying that over time. And it's just a really good way to make those kinds of clean energy investments like rooftop solar and things like that. A little bit more about the port. So they have expertise in brownfield development, accessible job creation. They target light industrial jobs, especially because those have low barriers to entry. You don't necessarily need a college degree to get a good, well-paying job at the kind of jobs that they target. They have a lot of expertise on sustainability as well. That's been a big push for them. Their developments in St. Paul have created, I believe the last count is 25,000 jobs and $27 million in annual property taxes, which for St. Paul is very important because we have a lot of non-taxable properties. So we really need that boost, and they've helped to provide it. The picture that I've taken there is one of their projects here on the east side, which is the Westminster Junction Business Center, which is home to 16 businesses and over 1,000 jobs. One of them, I didn't get a picture of it, but there is one of them, one of the businesses does have solar panels on it, and hope to see more of that kind of thing in the very near future. So before I get to kind of the road to the heights, does anybody have any questions at this stage? Feel free to just maybe raise those, and if our host could just call those out when you see them. All right, well, then I'll move right along. So this entire process so far has taken about 3 years, and it's looking that like construction will start by next year, which is really exciting. I regard that as a virtue, because to confront climate change, we know we need to move quickly. Some things need to be shut down, mostly fossil fuel infrastructure, and some things need to get built. And this is one of those things that needs to get built, and hope to see it getting built very, very soon. So when the port was going to figure out what to do with this site, they commissioned a study from Maxfield Research and Consulting to figure out what the site could support in terms of businesses, housing, and as well as what the area has a demand for. And this is what they found. So there's a high demand for housing in St. Paul. We are a growing city. The Greater East Side alone, I think since the last 2 censuses, grew by about 3,000 out of a population of what was previously about 27,000, I believe. So St. Paul is growing. A lot of people want to live here, so we need more affordable housing. There's a need for good paying job opportunities. The Greater East Side especially does tend to have those lower incomes, higher unemployment rates. And so what they arrived at was that they wanted to target about 1,000 housing units and 1,000 jobs, roughly speaking. They also found that while some people had suggested maybe office and retail space, there's not really a ton of demand for that at this particular site, and it just didn't seem like a good fit based on their market study. So Hence the target is kind of more of that light industrial housing, but there's some room for smaller businesses to kind of fit other needs. So beginning in 2019, the engagement process really kicked off with forums, surveys, pop-up meetings, and outreach happening right here in the Greater East Side, at least initially. And then obviously 2020 happened. We started going more virtual, but the turnout was I thought really positive. The city council passed ordinances to kind of get this process going, and the mayor appointed a community advisory committee that went from 2019 to 2021, kind of to target this. And I do see a question in the chat. The Mercury has not yet been cleaned up. It is currently still a brownfield. They are planning to probably start groundbreaking on that, if not this year, then the next year. That's the first stage in the process. It involves kind of moving the soil, salvaging it to the extent that you can, but it does require a lot of land clearing, which I will get to. A little bit more about the engagement process. So that continued on June 1st of this year. The city council approved the master plan after they went through the planning commission. They took testimony, did hearings. I was one among those who testified in one of those hearings. And so that is moving forward. At the same time, concurrently with that, the urban design and sustainability work groups were meeting. They're advisory committees, essentially, that you could apply to be on, including neighbors, just folks around St. Paul who have expertise on these issues. And so they met with the port and they met with consultants to try and decide what kind of recommendations that the community wanted to make the site a success. And so I was on the sustainability work group, and we dug into some of the details like transportation, energy, stormwater, services, and we came up with some recommendations and released those as a letter. And currently we are in the stage of environmental review, which is the AUAR, or Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review, which I will talk about a little bit later on. But that's kind of where we're at. And once that's done, then the fun stuff starts. Not that it wasn't all fun, but community priorities. So a lot of input was gathered throughout this process, and people didn't always agree on what we wanted, but there were some common themes that came out. We wanted the heights to integrate with the neighborhood. We wanted it to support clean transportation options. We didn't want a ton of traffic going through the existing neighborhood that's very residential, and we wanted there to be bus access, bike walk access, all those good things that help to fight climate change and make the community more livable. We wanted a mix of housing options, including some higher density options and some lower density, more single family kind of options is what was said. It's not, those details aren't set in stone yet. The housing work group is actually, I think, meeting now. And later in this year, they'll have one for the public spaces like the park that's coming. Good jobs, that's a big priority. We want good jobs that people can access here in our neighborhood. And we want community spaces. You can make a development however you want, but it should, it should be a place. Part of what went into that was the naming of the site, from Hillcrest to the Heights. The Heights is a pretty simple name, but it's placemaking. It kind of points to something, and it is the highest place in St. Paul, so very fitting in my opinion. And I want to talk a little bit about that picture that you can see there. So the one thing that I've really appreciated is that the Port Authority did these renderings of what the community could look like, and they put them on the fence surrounding the golf course so that if you walk by, you can just kind of take a look. Those are also available on the website, but it's really cool to see them kind of existing physically out in the world and seeing those pop up. So the Hillcrest Master Plan is what has emerged out of this process, and it's pretty cool. I really like the aesthetics of it. Certainly, hence you've got the next picture there where you can see they've got kind of a wetland, a boardwalk leading over towards the buildings that'll be up in the community. So first, I just want to mention the implementation tools, like how do you actually get this done and make sure that it's sustainable? You can use zoning, the city has control over, construction plans for the actual infrastructure, the roads, the water, the power that's going onto the site. Building covenants are a part of that the port can make with potential property owners. Obviously, building covenants can be used for evil, as they have been for segregation in the Twin Cities. But they can also be used for good. In this case, promoting clean energy. City ordinances, of course, can influence that. There's been some discussion of using TIF or tax increment financing for some of the housing aspects of this site, but it's kind of unclear if that will actually happen, and it would be a limited scale. For the most part, this site's gonna, or at least the basic infrastructure of the site will be paid for through land sales, not any cost to the taxpayer. And throughout this process, the Port Authority is going to work with WSB, that's one of their consultants, to figure out the infrastructure and how to meet their LEED goals, or leadership in energy and environmental design. So the master plan's land use is outlined at this map here. So the red part is higher density residential, that's about 13 acres. The tan section, which is kind of closer to the existing neighborhood houses, is going to be lower density residential, that's about 12 acres. The violet section, which takes up the largest portion, is light industrial space. And so that on the right side of that is McKnight Avenue, which is kind of the major street. And we want to direct traffic that way rather than directing it back through the existing neighborhood. The green section includes city parks. In the north end of that, you can see that kind of triangular shape. That's where they hope to have a big park, kind of a placemaking aspect that the city will manage. And then there's passive space as well. Some of that is accessible green space to the public. Some of it's private, but will still also be accessible. And then the bluish sections, there are wetlands currently on the site. Some of it, which I believe will still be maintained, but some of them, they do have to replace them because they're just too contaminated by the mercury. So I just want to play this video quick that is from the Port Authority on some of the energy stuff that they're doing that's very exciting, before I kind of explain it a little bit more detail. So that's just a little bit of a taste of kind of the vision that the port's laid out for the site, which all revolves around the LEED certification that was mentioned in that video. So the U.S. Green Building Council is kind of the biggest, most recognized standard for sustainable building in the United States. And so their LEED for cities and communities certification kind of covers an entire area. The goal here for Hillcrest, or for the Heights, is to pre-certify at the platinum level, which is pretty much unprecedented. This would be a first. There are some communities that have been certified at that level that already exist, but that's a somewhat different standard. Rochester, for example, here, or Rochester, Minnesota here, is certified at the gold level under LEED. So that's pretty cool. But this would really be more or less unprecedented in the world. And that's part of the reason that it could really put St. Paul on the map. A little bit more about the LEED checklist. So it covers these various areas, the process for designing the site, identifying and implementing those community priorities. Natural systems and ecology, transportation and land use is important, water efficiency, energy/greenhouse gas emissions, materials and resources, quality of life, innovation, and kind of how it's treated as a regional priority. And a little bit more on that, the net zero aspect of this. So I include this graph from the MPCA. Maybe some of you might have seen it if you've read any of MEP's briefing books, but this is a graph of the state's total carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. In Minnesota, transportation is the largest source of those carbon emissions, right up there with electricity and agriculture and land use. Agriculture is a little bit tricky. You can see the graph goes negative for part of that. That's because of reforestation. But those are the sectors that we really need to target, along with the ones down below, buildings, covering industry, residences, and commercial, and then waste and other minor sources. Transportation is a really stubborn one. Even as many cars and trucks have gotten more efficient, people have bought bigger ones. The average size has gone up, and electric cars aren't quite keeping up to the extent that can, do the whole reductions that we need in transportation emissions. Electricity is a different story, given that wind and solar are just phenomenally cheap now. So we're feeling a little bit better about that. Agriculture is maybe not as relevant to the heights, but carbon sequestration is maybe part of that. And then you have buildings, which is primarily heating and cooling. You can kind of see natural gas is listed as a major source on there. That's an interesting one that we're going to get into. So the goal is build a carbon-free community, right? Or at least as close as you can get. It's a tough one, but you know that the components can work synergistically. You minimize the power that you need. You make sure that it runs on electricity or other carbon-free sources. You generate it on site, primarily using solar panels on this development. Then you tie in clean transportation, and you address the embodied carbon, which is the carbon that's in the buildings and that it costs to put them up, put the materials into the buildings. So to start with, energy efficiency. The idea is that all buildings, this is in the master plan, all buildings over 5,000 square feet should be LEED certified, although ideally you'd have the smaller ones highly efficient as well. And all buildings should report their energy use so we can kind of get a sense of where things need to change, what needs to be done. Tree cover is important for all of these. We know that trees are great air conditioners. Communities with lots of concrete and few trees get much hotter than communities with lots of trees and less concrete. So that will certainly help with the energy efficiency aspect of the plan. And then it's all about, weathering, making sure that they can withstand Minnesota winters and summers, especially as the climate continues to change. And district energy is looked at as a strong possibility for a way to kind of efficiently run all of the kind of the energy use in one kind of central system. Renewable energy is mostly going to consist of solar on this site. Comprehensive rooftop solar looks like it could cover most of the site's energy needs. Potential community solar has been discussed, maybe having a community solar garden, but rooftop I think will be most of the efforts here. Having an all-electric neighborhood is a major target, obviously, because you can essentially greenify that fairly easily. There's probably not going to be a lot of natural gas hookups, but there may be a couple if there's a very specific, like industrial use is kind of the most common reason that you might have that. If you can't do something with electricity you need natural gas for, they may still have some of that, but it's not expected to be a big part of the site. Most buildings won't have it. And as the video mentioned, wind on site is not really feasible because the wind turbines would need to be too large or would take up too much space for this kind of dense urban area. The grid overall will draw more and more wind power in Minnesota as we continue to build those, but we don't need to put any on the heights. Heating and cooling, that's a really interesting one. This kind of blew my mind the more I learned about it. So the video mentioned geothermal, and this is looked at as a strong possibility if it can be done. So basically the idea is you use this thing called aquifer thermal energy storage. you use the groundwater as your heating and cooling kind of tool. So in the summer, what you do is you draw cold water up and you pump warm water down, and then the aquifer gets a little bit warmer. The water down there kind of keeps that temperature. And then in the winter, you do the reverse. You use a heat exchanger, you draw heat out of that, you use it to help cool the building. It's really huge in the Netherlands right now. It's quite possible it could be done here, but there is some research. Ground source heat pump that's a good question. This is the term that's listed kind of in the master plan. I'm not a heating and cooling engineer, but that's a good point, that heat pumps also have a role to play here. This is just looked at as a very strong possibility to just leverage kind of the natural resources on site. It does not seem to have a major impact on the aquifer, a negative impact, but that is something that they study to make sure that that's all going to work okay. Transportation is the next big section. As we know, that's our biggest source of carbon emissions here in Minnesota. And it kind of ties in with some of the difficulties that the east side has, where commutes are long. A lot of people want to use the bus. Some people may want to bike or walk, but it's kind of difficult. So you have to reduce those vehicle miles traveled, which means, any miles traveled in a car, truck, personal vehicle. So part of that is just the land use and location helps with that. If you put your factories, or not your factories, but your light industrial here in St. Paul, rather than way out in the kind of the exurbs or further out, that's an advantage, because there's economies of scale. There's lots of businesses around here that want to buy your products. Cut down on transportation costs. This is also where a lot of people live. As I mentioned, it's a very dense kind of community, 30,000 people in the Greater East Side alone. So that helps with, people don't have to travel very far in their commutes. But the Heights plan will help to increase the pedestrian walkability, develop more of those connections, add sidewalks where there currently aren't, make sure that safe sidewalks are implemented with plenty of separation from the road throughout the site, just to develop those safe streets. There's some really cool stuff that came out of the Urban Design Committee on this that I encourage you to take a look at if you go through the resources. The site road design itself will help to discourage speeding and use of the neighborhood as a pass-through, both of which can endanger pedestrians and increase air pollution. Beyond that, bus shelters, park space, bicycle storage are multimodal amenities that could help. And then new transit connections, that's something that's going to be kind of developed further down the line, since that's a metro transit province. But the city is going to work to make sure that those are provided. Currently, there are some bus routes, like you can see in this picture, that's the 64, that goes pretty close to Hillcrest, but not adjacent to the site. And I've ridden that bus many times. It would be great if it could go straight to Hillcrest, or if they could develop something to kind of augment that. But and then once you've done that, you have to electrify the remaining vehicle miles traveled. Electric cars, electric bikes as well, you could include as part of that. But making sure that there is adequate charging infrastructure is also part of the master plan. And then, as I said before, embodied carbon and construction. So this refers to the actual business of putting buildings together. A lot of you might know that concrete is one of our biggest offenders for climate change. I think concrete and cement kind of account for 8% of global carbon emissions at this point, or global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's obviously not great. That's expected to, it could increase due to urbanization, but we'd rather see a decrease due to new materials. So in the master plan, the idea is to model the carbon that will be expended or burnt in making these buildings, and then target reductions from there. Use low carbon or carbon sink materials like wood. I've included a picture there of the T3 building in Minneapolis that some of you might be familiar with, that is made of mass timber. That's a carbon sink because you grow the trees, they sequester the carbon, use them to build a building, and then the carbon's just sit there. The issue is just making sure that that timber is harvested sustainably. But if you can do that, then it's a good way forward. it's also been brought up in our sustainability work group that wood surfaces also have a measurable effect on human health. Just being around and looking at them can help your heart rate and things like this. It might sound a little weird, but it's true. They just have good health outcomes. But there's other things like recycled industrial byproducts. They can use coal ash, blast furnace slag to make much better cement, cut carbon emissions potentially by 50 to 80%. So very exciting things are happening in material science, and we certainly need them to happen. And then there was another recommendation in the sustainability work group that we prioritize local contractors, just folks who are in the area and kind of gain expertise on this stuff or bring their knowledge to the table as we build sustainability at the heights. As far as ecology goes, you can see this this is an example elsewhere in the east side of making sure that we're planting, native plants, integrating people and nature together, which has great impacts on neighborhood temperature, on mental health, all these great things, on wildlife, on pollinators, trees for carbon sequestration. We are going to have to see a lot of our trees on the site kind of go away, but there's some extent to which they can be kind of protected. I think it really fits with the character of the neighborhood to do these kinds of things. In the Greater East Side, I'm seeing more and more people do rain gardens, natural lawns, and so I think it'll really mesh well once it's done. Trees for carbon sequestration also requires us to make sure that any trees being planted in the neighborhood can kind of adapt to climate change so that we can sequester carbon for the future and keep the community cool and head off problems like streets going bare due to emerald ash borer. There's a lot of streets in the neighborhood that have seen, the entire boulevard trees just wiped out due to that. And by using these diverse adaptive species, we can try to make sure that those trees will be around for many years to come. Stormwater is another big part of this plan. Instead of treating stormwater as something just to deal with, we can also treat it as a resource for irrigation. You can have buildings capture it, use it for tree irrigation, which is especially important given that we want these trees to grow and thrive throughout the heat waves and other extreme weather events, which we can expect more of due to climate change. We know that 100-year storms are going to happen a heck of a lot more often than 100 years now. You need to make sure that the soil on this site will have lots of vegetation, lots of ways for that water to get down where it needs to go rather than flood all over the place. The soil on the Hillcrest site is mostly impermeable clays, so it does not absorb a ton of water. By diverting that into the wetlands, into things like tree trenches, you can make sure that you're not getting flooding in the basements or on the roads. And then you have the waste stream. The plan talks about pursuing a circular economy wherever possible in the employment areas, making sure that waste is being used, reduced, recycled, not in that order. Obviously, you do reduce, reuse, recycle for a reason. During construction, they hope to divert at least 50% or ideally 75% of that construction waste, and that can go to purposes like I mentioned, those low carbon materials, and just making sure that we're not sending that all to a landfill. And then there's other features. I wanted to make this presentation mostly about sustainability, but the master plan includes things like a 5-acre park, which will add to the already rich patchwork of parks we have over here on the east side. We'll have a placemaking neighborhood node kind of centered around that park where people can gather, can really be in a community with each other and enhance the neighborhood character. Public art's a big part of that. I've seen lots of different proposals for how to kind of incorporate East Siders into that to really make it a place that people just enjoy walking around. Could include even murals on industrial buildings, gateways placed around the site where you can kind of see like, I'm now entering the Heights and it's really cool here. And community gardens could be also considered as a part of this. They're really popular over here on the east side. People doing their own agriculture, making their own food, and hope to see something like that also come to the site. And then I have a few more optimistic notes, but I do want to note that there are some community concerns that have come up, and I want to address a few of those now, just because I know that they're pretty relevant. People have worries, understandably, that have lived here for a long time and they want to know how things are going to change. So one concern or one idea that's been brought up is, why can't we just leave Hillcrest the way it is or make it into a park? I understand the appeal, but unfortunately the soil on most of the site is toxic and unsafe. We need to clean it up, and we need to use that available land. I mean, I get that it's really cool having a giant park. Battle Creek Regional Park is just down the road from us. It's got, I think, more than 1,800 acres. It's run by Ramsey County, but this site on Hillcrest isn't a virgin ecosystem. It's full of mercury, and it was never a public park. And St. Paul as a whole has critical needs for housing, jobs, tax revenue, and not a ton of money for additional park spending. This Hillcrest will, result in an increase in park space through that 5-acre park, but it has not been a park before. St. Paul can't afford not to do green development on this site. Housing has been a point of some contention. I don't want to get too much into that, but there are some people who think that the density is too high or it's too low. I think whatever comes out is still to be determined. The outcome was probably going to be a compromise, balancing housing needs, neighborhood character, and the concerns of residents. I don't have time for an argument that density equals crime. That's one thing that I don't think is true at all. I understand, there will be neighborhood changes, but I think that this will be a real neighborhood enhancement. The Housing Advisory Work Group, as I said, is currently underway, and they will fill in more details on the housing mix. And then, of course, there's a light industrial one, and I want to address that because a lot of people hear light industrial and they think smokestacks, trucks driving down the street at all hours of the day, and tons of pollution. But light industrial is not necessarily, it doesn't fit that image. You don't think about the refinery down in Rosemount. I invite people to go down Phelan Boulevard and take a look at some of those businesses and workshops, like at the Phelan Westminster Center. One example of a light industrial building is a bakery that makes the bread they buy in the grocery store. There's one that I bike past on Phelan, actually. And really the only thing that I've detected emitting from that is an amazing bread smell. So hopefully we get one of those, because I'd love to smell bread every time I go on a walk, even if it makes me a little bit too hungry. Trucks, the plan is that they won't be passing through the residential streets that already exist. They're going to be heading over to McKnight on the eastern edge. There's things you can do to calm that traffic down, introduce tree screens to keep the noise levels and the smog levels down. But the big question is this feasible? And I won't pretend that it's not a heavy lift, but the answer is yes, as long as we get the right buy-in and investment here on the site. As long as the port and the city get the resources that's needed for this project. So as I mentioned, that the current step is the alternative urban area-wide review, which is an environmental assessment. It's not like an environmental impact statement like you'd see for like a big project, like a mine or something like that. This is very much smaller. It covers just this urban area. It lays out some possible scenarios, which include the comprehensive plan, master plan max intensity, which is a fun name, and then how you would mitigate various impacts in each of those scenarios, which include, air pollution, light pollution, etc. So here are the possible scenarios that are currently laid out in that AUAR. The comprehensive plan envisions 708,000 feet of light industrial, 960 housing units. Next one, the master plan has 840,000 feet light industrial, 960 housing units again. Max intensity is a little bit bigger, 1 million feet of light industrial and 2,615 housing units. So that will kind of be decided at a later date based on input from the community and other factors. The next steps, once that's done, and I do invite that if you are an expert or have any knowledge on these kinds of environmental reviews, you can go on the City of St. Paul website. You can look at the plan, look at the environmental review and comment if you want. I believe that's still open. But the next steps, so soil remediation will happen very soon. The land sales will be funding the basic infrastructure. And I happen to know that there's a lot of businesses that are interested in this site. I don't know what they are because the port doesn't release that information, but it sounds like it's very exciting. A lot of people are very interested in kind of having this sustainable business operation on this site, and having, very cheap or free power is also a pretty nice draw. Construction will be happening, I think, by next year is what it looks like. And some lots potentially developed by 2026. So only a few years from now. And then further development will come through 2030 is kind of what they're thinking now, to make this site a reality. But there is a price tag. It's not just one big lump sum, of course. Every dollar towards that goal helps the sustainability aspects of the site. But I saw the main Port Authority guy who's been spearheading a lot of this, Monty Hillman. He said in a recent article that we need about 100 million for this site to reach those lofty sustainability goals. That can come from private foundations, Minnesota DEED grants, that's Department of Employment and Economic Development. Federal grants are going to come into play. PACE financing, that's allows commercial property owners to finance energy investments over like a 10 to 20 year period and pay it as part of their property taxes. Really low interest rates on those. And usually you save money by doing that, because you save so much on your power, which is a pretty big draw for a lot of people. And then other state dollars may also come into play later on. So future benefits. I'll have a new place to take my dog. That's a pretty big one for me. This is a picture of me with my dog that we're walking somewhere on the North Shore, but would really love to enjoy that park with her. There'll be new jobs, new neighbors, new parkland, new amenities. And of course, another big one is that this is going to be a world-class model. We're going to show people that right here on the east side, we know how to do sustainable development, and we'll show you how to do it too. And I include this last picture. This is on Phelan. I believe the port and the city put this up. It kind of is an educational resource for how industries along Phelan came into being. And that's what I hope for this site, is that it'll be spread far and wide, that this exists, this was done sustainably, this was done net zero, and that your community, wherever you are, can do it too. Because honestly, that's what we need to fight climate change. That's what it's going to take, is we're going to need to, when we do development, we need to do it with these kinds of things in mind. This should be the new norm. And that's what I hope to see. So I'm going to leave this up just for a second. I put together a resource document for anyone who's interested in more information about all these different things I've been talking about. It's got City of St. Paul links, Port Authority links, and other information that I gathered for this presentation. And I will leave that up, but I will also ask for questions or comments. And I see that we have one from Doug.
Yeah, Matt, I have a question. You've done a beautiful job of laying this out and everything. And I'm somewhat familiar with what happened at the Ford site in St. Paul. And it somewhat the same goals as you're talking about here. Did you guys, and it's not turning out quite the way they expected, especially on the energy side of things, I understand. But did you guys have an opportunity to talk to the people that were involved with that project and, like learn from what they did and didn't do to help Hillcrest? That's
a good question. I followed the Ford site somewhat. I was kind of, I do a lot of mental comparing and contrasting. Obviously, again, I am not the point person on this. I just have, been a community member active in sharing my input on this. I suspect they probably did look at that kind of the compare and contrast as well. But there are some key differences. The Ford site, that's privately owned. I think it's still owned by Ford at this point. And right. The private company, Ryan Companies, is setting that up. Yeah. And I think what I've liked about this process is it has felt very like community centered. Like, what do we want to do to make St. Paul a really strong community here on the east side? So yeah, I think the process is also quite a bit longer with them. I think it's not necessarily how I would have done it. But I think that just the Port Authority managing this has been a real boon for getting that sustainability stuff really front and center.
Yeah, it really sounds good. The one other question I had was that geothermal kind of thing that you were explaining there.
Sure.
Is that, and I can't remember, did you say that has been tried in other parts of the world and it works good, or this is?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Netherlands is the big place where that happens. I think they have like 80% of the systems that exist in the world for that. They also do it in China. I think that's definitely expanding, but there's precedent for it. The graphic that I included was from a Dutch university that they have a lot of expertise on that, and I think that could be carried over potentially as long as the aquifer will handle it. But yeah, there's plenty of precedent for that.
And the other thing that ties with that, did you say that this would be linked to district energy or not?
They're looking at doing the entire site as under a district energy system. So it would be its own kind of self-contained thing, but it would manage, the energy, system.
Not tied to the downtown district energy system.
Right. Not like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris, I think you had a question. Chris, did you have a question? I saw an email.
I did see it in the chat too.
Yeah.
If Chris is unable to unmute at this time.
Sorry, there, I've unmuted. I wanted to ask if there were any plans for a youth or community learning center or workshop space as part of this, like I've seen and actually been part of working with other community housing developments in St. Paul.
Yeah, I do believe that that could be included as part of the neighborhood node. I don't know if they have anything solid on that yet, but again, the process is kind of still underway. That could be part of the public spaces discussion. But I think personally, I think that's a really good idea. And I hope to see that kind of take shape at the neighborhood node that they kind of envision as a community center. So
I should forward something I received from Rob Davis the other day, who's working at Connexus now and used to work at Fresh Energy. He's developing, along with NREL, a Lego kit that is a solar Lego kit. And it's agribusiness and all of that included in it, but it's just a great learning set. And, some of these things could be used in this setting to really teach the families that live here, let the kids and all be involved in helping envision a clean energy future.
Absolutely. I see we've got more questions about the mercury remediation. And as I mentioned before, I'm not a scientist, but I will do my best here. So I don't think they have to dig that terribly deep, but I think I'd have to refer you to the master plan for that, most likely. I'm not sure either if all golf courses have mercury on them. I just know that this one in particular used a ton of mercury fungicide. I'd imagine that a lot of them don't because of the obvious problems with that. And as far as the clothes go, I don't think that's a huge issue. The biggest issue is if you were to like ingest it or just, spend every day on it, that would be very bad. Like part of the reason that it's fenced off so the kids can't go in there and, grab at stuff and get it on their hands, put their hands in their mouth, those kind of things, because mercury is not something that you want to mess around with. But I can also look into that and share that with you later on, kind of offline.
Matt, have you guys had any support from large industries or XL Energy, 3M, that kind of thing?
I believe that I think the port has been talking to XL Energy about this. I've kind of, I don't know that I can speak to exactly where that is at this stage, but I know they're definitely pursuing things like that, as well as private foundations, trying to get that kind of support. I don't know exactly if 3M's been talked to about that, but that's a good question. And again, I don't want to speak for what the port is doing. They're the experts on that. So feel free to, reach out to them But I do appreciate you guys letting me share this story today.
Yeah, this is a great story. There was also a project somewhat similar to this at Arden Hills, and that's been going on for a number of years. And did any of your committees look at that at all? Do you know?
I don't think Arden Hills came up a ton in our group. It was very much well, we drew inspiration from a lot of different places, and part of our our homework for the sustainability work group, for example, was to go out and find examples of sustainability somewhere that you really like, and then bring them in. I don't recall Arden Hills being mentioned, but we take, it's taking inspiration from places all over the place, trying to get the best of all possible worlds here, and make it an East Side treasure. So.
Yeah, another one I'm familiar with that I wished would have happened. I'm so much hoping that yours succeeds, but there was something similar to this at the University of Minnesota property out at Rosemont.
Sure.
And it was going to be a self-contained world-class kind of eco community, but it just has never evolved to that. So anyway, I hope yours does.
Yeah, I hope so too. Just to kind of live on the East Side at this time when this is happening, taking shape, it's really exciting, and I think we're going to make St. Paul proud.
I was curious, is there any thinking at all as far as transportation? And I know they're probably rethinking light rail right now, but is there anything going out at all with light rail headed into, St. Paul?
I'm not aware of any at this point. It's a little bit of a tough legislative lift, especially right now. And given that there's already light rail extensions that are currently in the works or are being planned, I don't think they have any plans to do that. The Phelan corridor actually was kind of marked down as a place that could host future light rail. I'm not familiar with that actually, taking shape. They are putting in, hopefully soon, bus rapid transit on the Phelan corridor and going up kind of further north into the metro, up into Maplewood. It's not directly connected to the site, but it does run through the greater East Side. So there's definitely some exciting transit improvements coming, and hopefully this site will spur some more.
Yeah, where I live, we have BRT out here, and that's a great service, and to me makes more sense than light rail.
Yeah. I mean, light rail does take a lot of digging. And if you can electrify the bus rapid transit, then you're pretty golden.
Yep, exactly.
Well, I thank you guys for your time. If there's any more questions, I think that I would appreciate it if you just email me. Again, my email is matthew@mepartnership.org. And I'd appreciate any input, any questions you have, and I'd be happy to answer those or refer you to someone who can answer them better than I can. But if you have any questions about MEP, I'm certainly the expert on that. So,
Well, Matt, thank you so much. This has been great, a great presentation, really informative, and I think gives us all a better idea of how projects like this evolve. And so thank you again, and we'll be in touch. And for those of us with MRES, we'll close this meeting, and we'll be moving on to our MRES board meeting in the near future. So thanks again for everybody. Yeah, take care.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Ellie, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ellie.
See you soon.
Yeah.